So I think Squid Game is... I don't think it's overtly political. I think the whole thing is the perfect example of somebody who thinks they're opposing capitalism, but just makes communism and wokeness look really, really dumb.
Huh.
And the show ends up being, in my opinion, more anti-communist.
So the first of 2 recordings I am doing today, because it's set to be 34 degrees tomorrow, nearly 11 o'clock anyway, and it's still so hot. That's why I'm wearing a vest. So hopefully I'm going to get through these. Hopefully the videos will be about the same quality as each other. But I thought for the first one, and this one will probably release the day I am recording this, we would talk about the recent Netflix announcement that they're actually making a real-life Squid Game. You guys will already know I've made multiple videos on Mr. Beast's Squid Game, and I reviewed it. Wasn't all that impressed, but the main takeaway is it really obviously distorted the anti-capitalist message of the show. And what's more American than taking an anti-capitalist piece of media and turning it into something to generate yourself income while completely omitting the message of that show. But I want to bounce off the Squid Game stuff to start with, and this video is going to be a bit different. We're going to take multiple properties that have an anti-capitalist message and we're going to rank them, and the ranks are going to be based on how much the message has been distorted, or how much the anti-capitalist message or the anti-imperialist message or just a general leftist message remains in the work. Like, do most people who watch something or analyze it, do they understand this is meant to be a critique of society or our economic system? I would argue with Squid Game we are verging into the territory of no, but that will be the first case study, and then we're going to talk about things like The Matrix, we're going to talk about American Psycho, and I don't know what the ranking will explicitly be. I'm just probably going to say it as I go along, but I think by the end of the video you will see what has been distorted the worst. So before we get into all of that, please like the video, and in the comments, simple question: what do you believe is the worst example of an anti-capitalist piece of media being distorted or essentially sanitized by capitalists and used to profit from? So let me know down in the comments. Also follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter, on Instagram. Check out my subreddit, the link is in the description. Also consider supporting me on Patreon. I want to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, and the benefits of that are getting access to my Nintendo Switch friend code and also access to the private patrons Discord server. Check out my second channel, the Kavernacle Extra, and that's where my archive live streams go. Sorry I haven't been live streaming this week, it's just been too hot. My Wi-Fi's been down and the work has just been building up, so next week I will resume live streaming, archiving all that stuff, and everything else. So before we get into the Squid Game ranking, I just want to talk about the general trend in society to sanitize anti-capitalist people. I can see you guys right in the comments. The worst example of anti-capitalism distorted is 1984 being seen as apparently a book about communism, or maybe by extension a lot of Orwell's work. Animal Farm is apparently meant to be warning about the dangers of communism when it's very specifically about Stalin's Russia. But there's loads and loads of people and there's loads and loads of shows. So I want to talk about the people first and get you a leftist who can both quote Lenin in a video and somehow link that to Mr. Beast. So there is a quote by Lenin about Karl Marx, and although obviously, you know, Karl Marx wasn't around to watch Squid Game, which I'm sure he would have loved Squid Game and Metal Gear Solid, but it was about how Marx's own anti-capitalist theory had been distorted after he died. So let's just read this Lenin quote quick. So what is now happening to Marx's theory has in the course of history happened repeatedly to the theories of revolutionary thinkers and leaders of oppressed classes fighting for emancipation. During the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly hounded them, received their theories with the most savage malice, the most furious hatred, and the most unscrupulous campaigns of lies and slander. After their death, attempts are made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, so to say, and to hallow their names to a certain extent for the consolation of the oppressed classes, and with the object of duping the latter, while at the same time robbing the revolutionary theory of its substance, blunting its revolutionary edge and vulgarizing it. So of course Lenin is talking about people there, but who springs to mind apart from Karl Marx when he says that? Two people for me: Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was pretty much a communist. By the way he's depicted in Western media and film, you'd think he's like some apolitical saint who just thinks racism is bad. The same with Martin Luther King. we totally admit these guys, and especially Nelson Mandela, were radical anti-capitalist, and the only reason Nelson Mandela wasn't a more anti-capitalist leader of South Africa is because his own party stopped him. If you want to know more about that, read about what he wanted to do with land reform, something South Africa still really needs to deal with. But with Martin Luther King, you literally have his face plastered on cop cars. You have Republican politicians using his own words, people who would have absolutely hated him if he was still alive today. And I think what Lenin was saying about these figures can apply to shows, but of course there are loads of different elements in that although these people all wrote a lot of books, with shows they sort of take on a life of their own because a lot of the messaging is so woven into the story, you can at least understand why someone would enjoy something but not understand the political messages of it. But what we're doing in this video is talking about properties that have been appropriated by often the right wing for them to try and say, no, The Matrix is actually about X, Y, and Z. Metal Gear Solid is actually right-wing. Red Dead Redemption has a conservative message, when these things all have the opposite. So it's both sanitization and appropriation in these cases. But let's start with Squid Game, which I believe is one of the worst recent examples of capitalist appropriation of an anti-capitalist property. In this case, of course, Netflix owns the property. It paid for the creators to make this show. They can do whatever they want with it, but Netflix greenlights Squid Game The Challenge reality competition series. Netflix is bringing the global phenomenon Squid Game to life, the biggest reality competition series ever, Squid Game The Challenge, with both the largest cast and lump sum cash prize in reality TV history. 456 real players will enter the game in the pursuit of a life-changing reward of $4.56 million as they compete for a series of games inspired by the show, plus surprising new additions. Their strategies, alliances, and characters will be put to the test while competitors are eliminated around them. The stakes are high, but in the game, the worst fate is going home empty-handed. Recruitment open now at Squid Game casting. For this round, the frontman is in search of English language speakers from any part of the world. Squid Game took the world by storm with director Hwang's captivating story and iconic imagery. We're grateful for his support as we turn the fictional world into reality in this massive competition and social experiment, said Brandon Reig, Netflix VP of Unscripted and Documentary Series. Fans of the drama series are in for a fascinating and unpredictable journey as our 456 real-world contestants navigate the biggest competition series ever, full of tensions and twists with the biggest ever cash prize at the end. And here is something that might make you guys mad. Mr. Beast writes under the tweet, "Let me be a part of one of these challenges, please." So what I find really dystopian about a real-life Squid Game is, of course, yes, no one's going to die in this show, but with this massive sum of money, and with all these people going to be competing with each other, how much do you want to bet there's going to be a lot of people saying about how poor they are in competing for this money? There's lots of work done on how game shows have historically taken people's desperation for entertainment because of often their poor economic situation. So how much is this actual Squid Game going to do this? How much will there be parallels between the people forced to compete in the dystopian Squid Game from the shows and the real life Squid Game? I'm guessing with the amount of people there, even through the casting process, there'll be a lot of people who will actually be very similar to the real life characters, but except those fictional characters are there to make a point how they will keep coming back to this Squid Game because their economic situation, because of South Korea's massive debt problem and capitalism problem, they keep coming back to this game even though it's likely they will die playing it. And of course the game is a wider comparison with our capitalist system that forces us to destroy each other in pursuit of profit that only so many of us can have. And of course Squid Game is insanely popular, so there are loads of people who won't even understand the messaging to begin with. It's just the nature of that kind of popularity. With things like Mr. Beast's Squid Game and with this new Squid Game, how many people are not even going to realise the point anymore? Like, the point was meant to be a critique of South Korean capitalism, specifically what debt makes people do in South Korea, but now that's going completely the other way. And I'm not going to criticise Hwang Dong-Hyuk for playing ball with this and letting people do it. He actually liked the Mr. Beast Squid Game. I have no problem with him doing that, but in my opinion, something that could be useful in awakening some sort of class consciousness or some anti-capitalism has been totally appropriated for entertainment, which I find pretty ridiculous because the interesting thing about Squid Game, wasn't this game show where people die. That's been done before. It's not unique. He was inspired by Japanese manga, which is all about this. It's more the characters and the economic political message. And I just want to read for you quick what actually inspired him to create the show in the first place. So an interview with Hwang in The Guardians. Why did Hwang create a horrifyingly brutal contest that holds human life so cheap? Because the show is motivated by a simple idea: we are fighting for our lives in very unequal circumstances. Are you making a profound point about capitalism? It's not profound, it's very simple. I do believe that the overall global economic order is unequal and that around 90% of the people believe that it's unfair. So I did try to convey a message about modern capitalism. As I said, it's not profound. The idea for Squid Game came out of Hwang's own family situation in 2009 after the global financial crash. I was very financially straitened because my mother retired from the company she was working for. There was a film I was working on, but we failed to get finance, so I couldn't work for about a year. We had to take out loans, my mother, myself, and my grandmother. I wanted to create something that would resonate not just for Korean people, but globally. This was my dream. In this life and death struggle, social norms are torn away, and the contestants are trapped in a war of all against all, in which human life is nasty, brutish, and short. We are living in a Squid Game world, says Hwang, but he says not everybody in his drama is selfishly looking after number one, climbing over losers' faces to win the money. So if you watch my video about Mr. Beast specifically, I talk about that interview a lot more and talk about his own political beliefs and what he wanted to convey with Squid Game. But with Squid Game specifically, unlike some of the other things we're going to be talking about, it's not even like very subtle. And like he says, he's not making a profound point about capitalism. He feels that's just the reality for so many people. And contrast that to like Mr. Beast's own Squid Game. Yeah, it's fun and entertaining for people. I didn't think it was all that good. But in the video, he's constantly just like cracking jokes, all this different stuff with his mates.
I recreated every single set from Squid Game in real life, and whichever one of these 456 people survives the longest wins 456 grand. And while they're fighting for their chance in this competition, I want to tell you guys about Brawl Stars, who helped fund this video, which cost over $3.5 million. Thank you so much. Throw. Brawl Stars is a mobile game you can play at home, on the go, in this arena, wherever you want, against millions of people across the world.
He can't even bring himself to say the creator's name either. Like, he literally mentions him for 1 second at the end, and they have to put his name with subtitles, because that's how much this guy actually loves Squid Game and appreciates the message.
Congratulations on winning. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. You have 7 days to win $10,000. And obviously, massive shout out to the creator of Squid Game. We took huge inspiration from the show, and I genuinely appreciate you. Goodbye.
And my main problem with Mr. Beast's videos, he has such a massive platform, he could actually include something at the end where he could educate his viewers. So you could say like, this version of Squid Game was for a lot of fun, but it was inspired by Hwang Dong-Hyuk's work, which tackles a very serious issue. Don't have to talk about capitalism, say about the personal debt crisis in South Korea. I mean, he could do that, but again, Mr. Beast just wants to profit off this. He doesn't really care, and he barely can even bring himself to mention the actual creator of the show. So with this new Squid Game coming out, and with Mr. Beast's Squid Game already existing, of course we're getting a Squid Game Season 2, but how much has the whole message of the show being really subverted, sanitized, and actually used to profit from the system it's actually creating? I would say it's one of the worst examples, just for the fact it's so very blatant what it's trying to convey. Like, the game show thing, unlike some other properties, isn't so unique that you just want to do it, because there are so many game shows like this. There are so many game shows that have been done just like this before. I would say overall, Squid Game is one of the worst offenders for capitalists taking this and trying to appropriate it to make themselves profit. It also has the luxury of lots of people on the right trying to actually say it's an anti-communist thing, like Big Brain Tim Pool tried to do.
So I think Squid Game is... I don't think it's overtly political. Apparently, you know, you were telling me, Gary, that it was like, there's like a political message in Squid Game.
Yeah, the writer, at least that's what he said.
My takeaway from it was communism bad. That was my takeaway from it. I think the whole thing is the perfect example of somebody who thinks they're opposing capitalism, but just makes communism and wokeness look really, really dumb. Huh. And the show ends up being, in my opinion, more anti-communist than anything. So one of the big themes in the show is that everyone is equal. They all enter the game as equals. In capitalism, we recognize not everybody is equal. Not everybody does have an equal chance. We do want equal opportunity, but some people are poor and some people are rich. In this system, everyone is wearing the same clothes in the same room, being brutalized by the powers that ultimately results in one person having all the wealth and everyone dying. That is not capitalism. In capitalism, there's too much food. People are morbidly obese, and there are homeless people who are fat. In communism, everybody wears the same clothes. They have limited access to anything. They get garbage food every day. They're like, okay, the game's over. Here's the food you get, and they get trash. Yeah. And they're fighting each other because they're starving. That, to me, is an indictment of communism. And if this guy who made the show is actually like, it's actually capitalism that's bad, I'm like, it just goes to show this is a person who made a great show but was really dumb and didn't understand they were actually critiquing communism.
Oh yes, Squid Game, set in South Korea, where the only North Korean character has a scene where they're silent about what they feel about South Korea compared to North Korea because it's literally illegal to say anything positive about North Korea in South Korea. Yet this is the show that is anti-communism. I'm always amazed at conservatives' inabilities to actually dissect media. So that is the first example, one of the worst. Now let's move on to The Matrix. Now, The Matrix, of course, especially the first one, was an absolutely global phenomenon, but when you watch it, it's not really so much for the political messaging. It's more for the cool action, the sunglasses, the leather jackets, the slow-mo, and the sci-fi elements to it. But I would say it's also pretty clear, like a lot of late 90s movies, it has this end of history capitalism vibe to it, in that, you know, these office blocks that Neo finds himself in near the start, very resemblant of Office Space, of American Beauty, of Fight Club, and it's about this unfulfilling corporate capitalist life in many ways. But of course, the main bit that's been appropriated and perverted is the whole part with Morbius talking about taking the blue pill, or of course taking the red pill. And that part has been appropriated the worst by pretty much every type of ideology. And I just want to read about the politics of The Matrix quick before we talk about this stuff a bit more. So Lily Wachowski shares how Matrix franchise was inspired by rage and oppression before their transition. When the director was forced to pen an open letter about that journey in the Windy City Times after a Daily Mail reporter showed up on her doorstep, she realised that her films held greater meaning as trans folks began sharing their impact. Now that I'm out and a living example of someone who can grow old being a trans woman, trans people can see those films through the lens of my transness and their transness. They're able to go, oh my god, these films were such an important part of my coming out and my own journey. I'm extraordinarily grateful that I could offer that to people. She reveals that so much of The Matrix, for example, was born out of a lot of anger and a lot of rage, and it's rage against capitalism and corporatized structure and forms of oppression. Wachowski explains that the bubbling, seething rage within me was about my own oppression, that I was forcing myself to remain in the closet. The result is that a lot of subtext backed into the franchise about the spectrum of gender and the trans experience. Now, of course, we're moving on to this red pill part. So Ivanka Trump saying taken after Elon Musk tweeted, take the red pill, and Lily Wachowski saying F both of you. So The Matrix is an interesting one here in how it's been appropriated, because even Keanu Reeves didn't actually realize The Matrix was about being in the closet transgender until I think the fourth movie was coming out and someone told him and he said he thought it was cool. But even the star of The Matrix didn't realize it was about this, and I guess many people never realized it. But the anti-capitalist element, I think, is pretty clear in a way, especially with how the machines literally use humans to sustain their life force. Like, it's very, very on the nose that these humans are sedated and put in a virtual world to basically be fuel for the machines. And unlike Squid Game, I don't think The Matrix is obviously this massive, massive deep critique of capitalism or anything like that, but I do think it is there. But I think because of maybe the vagueness, it was a bit more ripe for appropriation. And actually the speech by Morbius was used in Mr. Robot by the character of Mr. Robot to Elliot, basically saying the exact same thing, but he's using it to describe the capitalist economic system, rather than making it a bit more vague with Morbius, where you can read this as someone being in the closet as trans, but of course you can also read it as someone waking up to the horrors of capitalism, because Neo is living in this facade of this, virtual 1990s end of capitalist world, which is very unfulfilling for many people. That's what many of the 90s films are about. And I think it's clear from that standpoint, choosing to take the red pill over the blue pill obviously has nothing to do with anti-feminism, and that's the main thing it has been about: men's rights and anti-feminism, which is extremely ironic considering how much the Wachowski's transness is really shown in this film. And I wanted to talk about V for Vendetta a tiny bit, but I decided not to go down that route, but that's another one. Obviously, the Wachowskis wrote that film, but it's an Alan Moore comic. But Hugo Weaving, who's in both films, talked about this, and I really, really love this quote. Hugo Weaving sounds off on Republicans and far-right twisting the Matrix and V for Vendetta. I am befuddled by it. It just goes to show how people don't read below the surfaces, they don't read between the lines, they will take something that they think is cool and they will repurpose it to fit themselves when the original intentional meaning of that thing was quite the opposite. Extremely, extremely spot on, Hugo Weaving. The problem with the culture is that these films are profoundly thought through, but it's too easy to look cool and have a cool haircut and have a gun, and you think that's all you need in life. But you haven't thought about what that gun is for, and what the haircut is for, and what those black clothes are meant to be. What are you trying to do all this for? Is it for narcissism and ego, or is it about community and thinking about what's right for other people? So I guess my criteria for these films we're going through and properties we're going through is how much do people miss the explicit messaging versus the messaging itself. So the messaging of The Matrix is, of course, anti-capitalist, leftist, obviously pro-transgender. But the movies, especially the first one, I don't think the movies are that strong narratively. I actually thought there'd be a lot more to them when I first watched them because I watched them as an adult. So I would say it's far easier to miss the messages of The Matrix and just enjoy it as this film compared to Squid Game. But at the end of the day, the appropriation of The Matrix for certain political ideologies is so much missing the mark. I would say this is actually a really bad one as well. So I would rank this one as bad, but not as bad as Squid Game. So moving on, next we have American Psycho. And I might kind of tie Fight Club into this because I guess they are quite similar in many ways. Now, with American Psycho, I don't know about you, when I first watched it, I clearly got the message that this was about the, unregulated Reaganomics of the 1980s. Very, very anti-capitalist, very, very anti-Reagan, this film. And the way it displayed it was through the violence of the main character and essentially no one really caring what he did. And even when he's literally screaming it in people's faces, tells his lawyer he's done all these terrible things, they don't believe him or they don't really care. And it plays into the ending. Is this all in his head, or did he actually do these things? And literally society does just not care. And that was kind of like the message about capitalism and Reagan, is like, no matter how brutal you are in this system, how much awful things you do, people will essentially look away. And there's obviously like more commentary about identity, how like most people don't even remember his name. People think Paul Allen might be alive, and it's kind of up in the air in the film, is Paul Allen actually alive or is he not? But then it doesn't really matter because everyone kind of fits into this one category where they all act the same, they all talk the same, they're all these cogs in this capitalist machine. Now, there was a good article I read, just to elaborate a bit more, how American Psycho predicted the capitalism and masculinity and the chaos of 2020 by Paulie Doyle. And just helpful for linking it to, Fight Club, American Psycho is similar to other films that came out at the same time, like Fight Club. Here we have a nihilistic protagonist, a vaguely anti-capitalist story, and a director keen to make a statement about the cultural decline of America. Yet the film holds up in ways its contemporaries do not. Tyler Durden rebels against a world that young people would now see as paradise. Both men are engaged in self-pity and lament at being doomed to a life of middle-class comfort. American Psycho offers a glimpse into the psyche of a sociopathic corporate elites who still very much hold the reins of power today. All social relations in Bateman's life are warped by capital. The extent to which an individual's flaws are ignored is directly proportional to the amount of wealth and status they can accrue. Trump's personal brand, cartoonishly terrible hair, Gorman's personality, ethically dubious business practices is the ultimate proof of this. Bateman will continue to get away with his deviant behaviour if he projects the image of a successful person. Bateman can be understood as representing the unarticulated impulses, longings and desires of American capitalism, as if the idea of the United States came to life and put on a designer suit. This has made him more relevant as capitalism continues to grind forward and elites gain even more concentrated, unaccountable power. So I think on the surface, American Psycho's political message is very, very obvious. But I would say the political appropriation of American Psycho has not been as drastic as many of these other things. For example, the main things I see him for are unironic Sigma male posts about like this Sigma grind set. I don't understand how anyone wants to be like Patrick Bateman, but there's other people as well, more like terminally online 4chan users, mainly right wing, who feel like they are Patrick Bateman because he's kind of like this alpha male personality, but no one really sees him. And you can see why Sigma males might identify with him in that he is in good shape, he's relatively wealthy and everything like that, but still society doesn't care. Society doesn't pay attention. Really omitting the fact he's like a serial killer as well. But I have never seen a serious analysis of American Psycho without at least discussing Ronald Reagan. So this article talked a bit about Fight Club. So I think it's another example. Of course, the term snowflake was popularized by Fight Club, and I think its usage in society does show how this anti-capitalist and anti-toxic masculinity piece of media was appropriated by the right-wingers to be like, you know, fighting is awesome. You don't talk about Fight Club and use snowflake unironically because of how they use it in Fight Club. Totally missing the point of Fight Club, which shares a few similarities with The Matrix in that it's a criticism of middle class corporate capitalism and how unfulfilling this life is, the same with American Beauty. I would say Fight Club's main contribution to general politics is the term snowflake. It didn't invent it, but in my mind it did popularize it. But I feel like with both of these movies specifically, people enjoy them for being good movies, and Christian Bale is absolutely, you know, amazing as Patrick Bateman. So I can understand how you can just enjoy these films. But I would also say their cultural impact and the use of them by capitalists and right-wingers is just not as big as Squid Game or The Matrix. So I would say that although people miss the point of these movies massively and miss the critique of these movies massively, I would say because it doesn't have as much cultural influence, I would say most serious analysis of these films have to talk about economics. I would say this one hasn't been properly appropriated by the capitalists. Let's move on now to video games. Now, gamers not understanding the politics of games is probably even worse than movie fans. I'd say with actual movie fans, not just people who enjoy movies, like people who are very into film and into directors and people who make these films, I would say most people don't really miss the messages that badly. But I feel like more with hardcore gamers compared to hardcore movie lovers, they often either miss the messages of their favourite games or they try and appropriate it for their own ideology. So I made like 2 videos of this back in the day, you guys remember. Abby Shapiro and her husband trying to play conservative games to dunk on the left. Now they played through BioShock, which of course is a critique of Ayn Rand libertarian capitalism and objectivism, and I've made whole videos on that, so I didn't want to talk about BioShock again. But here is something I did want to talk about again. They say Red Dead Redemption is actually pro-conservative, especially the second one, which I find mind-blowing. So have a look at this clip.
Every level dripping with the theme and stuff like that, but nonetheless interesting. You might look at that, but Red Dead Redemption 2 would be a lot of fun. The game's whole, a lot of themes, robber baron kind of stuff with the Leviticus Cornwall enemy, the idea of the government cramping down on the individual's romantic life of the outlaw, and how sad and bad it is that the way of the outlaw is coming to an end, except that the main character and his gang are a bunch of horrifying parasites who only leave destruction and death in their wake and are incredibly morally myopic, selfish, disgusting people. So the game really undercuts its own dramatic narrative and characterization. You can throw things in the hopper, but remember, it's all about flexing on the left and demonstrating what conservatism is in some way. So BioShock, very natural way to do that. Red Dead Redemption 2, with its themes of like, oh, you know, the oppression of the individual by the encroachment of society, with a very like Joker movie form of like, oh, we move into society stuff. That's also a great opportunity to flex on the left and demonstrate conservatism. So just anything that fits that theme is potential. So please, opine, throw something our way.
So because Red Dead Redemption 2 has an absolutely huge appeal, like sold millions and millions of copies, and loads of people just enjoy that game, I don't really think that so many people would really even think about the politics of Red Dead so much, especially because it's set in a historical setting. So I don't believe generally that Red Dead has been appropriated to say this game is about right-wing politics or pro-capitalism, because I don't believe that is a mainstream view of things, mainly because anyone who analyses Red Dead's story and politics is not going to come to that conclusion. But I will admit a lot of gamers probably just don't even think about this stuff while playing it. But to see a conservative guy who's like a lawyer for like the Young American Foundation try and spin Red Dead Redemption as somehow pro-conservative, pro-capitalist is very, very laughable. And using the example that the gang you play in are depicted as parasites who only leave damage in their wake, I don't think most people get that reading of the gang. Yes, there is like morally grey areas. There are bad things the gang do. Of course, you can play Arthur as a primarily good person. But I think the game clearly shows that industrialization and putting people under this capitalist thumb is not a good thing. You can see this in bits around Cornwall Leviticus's mining town and how people live there. And you can see it in him being this bad guy and this exploitive capitalist. There's a whole part about Native Americans dealing with the US government and being forced off their reservation and having their land stolen by the government and capitalists. This game really isn't sympathetic to the onslaught of capitalism in the early 1900s and how it forced people into this system. The gang hates Saint Denis, like Dutch definitely does, and the only reason you would somehow think this is pro-capitalist is if you think the gang in the game are meant to be shown as the bad guys, and everything they do is bad, their way of life is bad, and they're all just horrible people. The game clearly is not saying that. There are many people in that gang who are just totally innocent. Like, they don't even do anything bad. They're just part of this outlaw lifestyle where they do not want to conform to society's norms. Then you have awful people like Micah and to a lesser extent Dutch. Then you have pretty good people like Charles, like Sadie, like Arthur, if you want to play in that way. And a lot of their ideology is not seen as something harmful. And also in this game, women have a better role in their gang. And also there's more racial harmony in this environment. I don't think the gang is depicted as bad guys. I don't think it's shown to be bad. And I think the main bad thing in this game is people like Cornwall, capitalist society, and how capitalism destroys things like Native American culture and land. I think if you're going to take political messaging away from the game, it's more sympathetic to that reading rather than Arthur and his gang are parasites and the onslaught of capitalism is a good thing. These people must be civilized at all costs and we should just use the land purely for a few rich people to make profit. Again, I don't know how you can read Red Dead like that, but I think this is more like a fringe view. I don't think most people who analyse the politics of this game, no matter what their beliefs, would say that Red Dead Redemption presents a pro-capitalist world. You might as well make the argument to me that GTA 4 is pro-conservative when literally everything in that game is anti-conservative. So that is just like a small list for you to show you the varying degrees of how popular entertainment gets appropriated. So The Matrix and Squid Game are probably the worst examples where views about these properties have become quite mainstream and have distorted the anti-capitalist message and sanitized the anti-capitalist message and become something else entirely, where things like Red Dead Redemption, American Psycho, maybe even Fight Club, while there's been some attempts to appropriate these movies, maybe even paint them in a pro-capitalist light or pro-conservative light, I still don't think it's been very successful, because if you analyze these things, you'll realize that they are anti-capitalist, and it's very, very hard to spin it as anything otherwise, despite many attempts to do so. But I think Squid Game is still the worst I've ever seen as completely missing the point of the show, where you take the game show element, remove the politics of it, and just try and make it a fun game show. And like I said at the start, and with the Netflix show, how much do you want to bet that so many people involved in that will actually be very desperate for money to maybe even pay off their debts, just like the show. The only difference being is you don't get killed if you leave. Anyway, that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Follow me on social media, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.